Part 2 with lifelong A's fan and East Bay native, Kevin Peters.
You are Locked On A's, your daily Oakland A's podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On A's, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your host, Bunni. That's right, one name. Episodes will drop Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. That's Oakland, Vegas, and Sacramento time. Whether you are on your way to work, driving back from work, or listening casually during the day, thank you for making Locked On A's your first listen of the day. I'm from the Bay Area, and I've been a diehard A's fan since 1981, and I'm here to bring you a real fan's take, covering everything from Oakland to Sacramento to Las Vegas. This is the place for A's fans to get the latest game breakdowns, team news, and more. This is where the passion of the fans takes center stage. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. And please hit that subscribe button wherever you are following the show. This episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today we continue with part 2 with lifelong A's fan and East Bay native Kevin Peters. Kevin Peters was an absolute stud in his take on what was going on with the Oakland A's, their move to Sacramento, potentially to Vegas, and what it means to him that they are leaving absolutely resonated with me. I cannot wait to get back in the conversation with Kevin. We're going to talk about the move. We're going to talk about the A's legacy, Moneyball years. Who knows? Maybe a little Home Depot, Bed, Bath, and Beyond if we have time. East Bay native, longtime A's fan. Part 2, Kevin Peters.
Being there for the Tigers playoff game was insane. 2012 and 2013, sat on Mount Davis. Every time they were in the playoffs, that stadium was filled. And I want to be clear, this was a football stadium. This was a football stadium. So it's like almost like, I don't know, 130% bigger than a baseball stadium. And it was packed to the brim. So when they say that there's no A's fandom, like, yeah, maybe there's not as many casual fans because there's not a casual aesthetic, right? You go to the stadium, it is dingy. Like, I don't mind. It's a fun, right? It didn't feel as bad as people. It felt like people were dramatizing how bad the stadium is. It's bad, but it's not what people were saying. But the point is packed. That stadium is meant for football, so it's about 130% times bigger than a baseball stadium. And when they say that there's no A's fans, I always look at that. I'm like, this something's not right. Now, there's no like A's casual A's aesthetic that makes it fun for an A's fan. But if there was, you could get that for a lot more nights. I'm not going to say it's the whole season or even half the season, but that could be a more popular scene if they invested in the team, right? And when you see these playoffs games, I'm talking about crowds of 45,000 people. That's insane. At fully packed houses. And like, I think that's what the baseball realizes. It's hard to pack a full stadium like that on a nightly basis. And so that's why they want those villages. That's why they want the ancillary development. They want things that are going to attract the casual fan. And the thing that's beautiful about the A's fan is, yeah, maybe there's only 12,000 people out there, but those are 12,000 diehards. Imagine how many casual fans exist if you were to invest just a fraction of some of the other teams. You know, they could look very different. The only thing he's ever done is announce places that he would like to move. He never did the research. He never got user testing groups. He never went to the government of those cities. He never did the work. He just released a rendering and was like, we want to move here. And then that was the end of it. And, for someone whose dad worked a part of the Giants staying in San Francisco, I'm really surprised at his lack of understanding around those guidelines and amendments that they made for zoning, right? San Francisco territory. Um, it's also strange. It's also smoke and mirrors because that contract expired because the Giants stayed, but they still upheld that contract that San Jose is San Francisco Giants territory, which is weird. MLB has absolutely stamped it. They were never this supportive in Oakland when they came to help push things along. And I heard a recent conversation with you and Sully and talking about the thing that Vegas has that Oakland doesn't. I hate hearing that only because what Oakland was able to do was mitigate the amount of taxes and spin on the residents here because of the poor stadium deal that was done with the Raiders when they built Mount Davis, right? And so a lot of the money that was created for infrastructure was 900 million in bonds.
Yes.
So he got more money by almost 3 times that he got in Vegas in Oakland, right? And so I don't think that's what people want you to understand. The money is and was here and was created for them to take, and it does exist, and they are getting more, but that's the real proof that they just want to be gone. Who turns down more money?
Today's episode is brought to you in part by FanDuel. When I personally look at a sports book, there are 2 things that are most important to me. Is it easy to deposit? And more importantly, is it easy to withdraw? FanDuel checks both boxes for me. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The A's legacy and the A's winning tradition speaks for itself in not only baseball's history, but since they have made the move to Oakland. Since the early 2000s, the A's winning was credited with a notion called Moneyball, which I have spoken about in past episodes and have been critical against. Kevin has an opinion that is not necessarily opposite of mine, but he definitely believes that Moneyball was a contributor to the A's success. And teams do currently use the Moneyball theory, mostly in small markets. Let's get Kevin's take on exactly where he stands with regard to the idea of Moneyball, and does Moneyball belong in the legacy of the A's?
It doesn't matter how poorly their teams perform. They always pick the Angels ahead and the Rangers ahead because they have brand names and jerseys that they sell. They have names that people can attach to. That, I think, is the biggest crime in Oakland. When they had that Moneyball team, you had Chavez at third, right? He had been snubbed from numerous all-star teams, so he didn't ever get the notoriety that he had. But if you look at his statistics, he should have been revered as a league favorite. You had Tejada at short. And I mean, we know about Tejada and the MVP season and all of those things. You name it. We had the big 3 in terms of pitching. We had a couple players at the bullpen that were, you could consider Moneyball players, niche players, Corey Bradford being one of them. But for the most part, Ramon Hernandez was a great player for those few seasons. And the list goes on in terms of players that were I don't know, maybe above. I'd like to see what their WAR was, their OPS plus was now. That wasn't really a stat that was tracked at that time, but there were a number of team players I feel like would be above 100 and even maybe the 110 margin. And they didn't share them once. It was Jason Giambi left. There's no one here, and there are a bunch of scrap players. And I think that image did the most damage because the A's have always been able to acquire talent and get players to perform above that talent grade, Brandon Moss being one of them for a later team, Jed Lowry for the 2012 team, that we believe team. And I think that's the biggest thing because when you don't have players, people don't attach to you. Too often, people are like, oh, you're an A's fan? Why? Like, are you guys terrible? They were saying that in 18, 19, 20, 21. These are playoff years. Why is the perception that the team is terrible when they're going to the playoffs? Like, why is the perception that the team is terrible when they've gone to the playoffs 12 or 13 years of the 23 years, 22 years at the time? It's in 2022. The team has gone to the playoffs 2012, 12 or 13 times. Why is the perception that that's an awful team that's always in the cellar? Even in those years when the team didn't win, maybe it was third or fourth place, but never the rock bottom. You know what I mean? And so I always thought there was a huge dissonance between what are the A's and what do the A's actually look like. And at that time, Fisher and the A's would receive a lot of criticism. The A's don't spend any money. Like, they don't have anybody. They're a bunch of no names. They're a bunch of scrap players. And at times that was very misleading. But the key is that he doesn't he's not being held accountable for any of that criticism that he drew when he was getting rid of players that A's fans revered. When he traded Josh Donaldson, when he traded any of these players that were Marcus Semien didn't even get a qualifying offer. That's insane.
Right. Yeah,
offered him $1 million for 12 years. These aren't stories that get talked about, but it paints a broader picture, right?
Yes.
The draft picker Kyler Murray clearly to me looks like one that's about saving money because he's talked about how he's had gripes with paying his draft picks and his farm system. So you draft somebody that you know isn't going to come to baseball. So you can get out of paying that $9 million slot value.
Right.
So like there are these things that cut into the imagery versus the actual performance. And I think ultimately this aligns with like the allure of Vegas. I think they think that like Vegas is going to draw a ton of money and what big name players aren't going to want to play in Vegas, right? And that's where you get that political discourse where it's Oakland versus Vegas. It's the political demographics. It's the marquee versus the like little small town thing. It's that perception that I think he's really crafted well. And Moneyball, I think, exacerbates that. But Moneyball in and of itself, like, no.
I think the Moneyball brand does the A's franchise and legacy a disservice. No one talks about that 2002 team when we're talking about Mark Mulder. As many people know that he was the number 2 overall pick. Barry Zito was the number 9 overall pick. Eric Chavez was the number 12 overall pick. Do people realize that on this year's team, J.J. Bleday was the number 4 overall pick. Shea Langeliers was number 8 overall pick. You got Tyler Soderstrom at first, who was the number 28 overall pick, another first rounder. You have Jacob Wilson potentially as another top 10 pick. You take these picks in the position they were picked at, and you take that and you put it into an NBA franchise or team where the draft is so much more celebrated than it is in Major League Baseball, we have a different look. Gary Payton Jr. now is not considered a Moneyball type of player to a Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and Draymond Green. Sure, does every single team in professional franchises need a role player in order for you to contribute to winning 100%? But the brand and the actual term Moneyball takes away from the talent Oakland has had, and the perception now has turned into just a bad franchise. that needs to save money and look into the numbers and statistics of sabermetrics to put anything on the field that has any type of validity. That's the issue I have with Moneyball. It is exactly that. The core players they had on those teams were studs. Tim Hudson, who they stole in the 6th round, was the SEC Player of the Year from Auburn. I mean, they were just good. Is sabermetrics and analytics important in baseball? 100%. But not many other teams are being have that stamp on them as far as Moneyball. And I feel at the end of the day, that stamp of Moneyball and the Oakland A's did them a disservice. Because the public reality is like they really need to go in deep to get anything that's a solid product on the field. And who gets all of a sudden, who gets all the credit for that? Wow, general manager is genius. Ownership is genius. No, they got some studs who are really, really good.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's kind of what I'm getting at too. Is it's like it's not necessarily Moneyball itself, but it's a symptom of Moneyball, where this idea that the team is talentless and that scrap heap players is really not fair. Does it make for a good cinema and a good movie? Absolutely, but the reality is both exist. There were all-stars and high-performing players and name brand players. But you know what stands out? It's the John Mabrys. It's the Hattebergs. It's the Chad Bradfords. It's the Frank Minichinos. It's the like utility players that performed so well to their niche metric and why they were brought in the first place. It's the platoons that showed the heroism. It's the closing of all these games when we lost an all-star closer in Isringhausen the year before. It was the fact that the A's weren't supposed to compete without a Giambi and were able to patch together some on-base metrics that then would turn the lineup over for the core of the lineup. The disservice of Moneyball isn't necessarily the fact that it exists, because I do think that there's success that has happened from the A's. And without Moneyball and the lack of budget from John Fisher, I don't know that the A's compete through those early 2000s teams, and then also again through the teen years, right? 12, 13, 14. There's such a disconnect between the draft and your farm and then your major league team. To your point, you have the 6th pick, the 9th pick, the 12th pick, and all these things. But people hardly ever know where these players are drafted, one. And two, just because you draft those players in baseball doesn't necessarily mean they're going to turn out to be the impact players that their slot suggests. And that happens more in baseball than in any other sport. Typically, you draft a 1-2, you drop the lottery pick in basketball, that guy is going to be a high performer. You're going to have your outliers, but that guy is going to be an immediate contributor, maybe a perennial all-star, and a high-level impact player. Probably, maybe even if you get lucky, a Hall of Famer. In baseball, it's a crapshoot. You can have top 10 guys that end up being role players, right? And so I think that the whole reason why a Blade was available is that Miami thought that, they rushed him up, and we know. But the whole thing was like, he's bust potential, right? This kid can't really hit at the major league level. He strikes out too much. We needed an impact player that can play now. Let's shore up the bullpen and cycle through another hitter that we've drafted. Insert to Oakland, where players are really developed, and that draft stock is really measured. Because the whole idea in Oakland is, if you were drafted there, there's a reason. You are talented, and every scout saw it, right? Brent Rooker's another player that was, I think he's top 10 out of Mississippi State as well.
I think he was drafted late. He was drafted late.
First round, though, right? First round.
No, he was 35th overall pick. Yes.
Okay, so collective
he was first round
pick. Yeah. So, but the idea here is that if you've done it, if you're drafted in that position and you're a first round talent, then you probably just haven't gotten your shot, and so that's how you have Rooker as well. You know what I mean? And so I think that there is that disconnect. That's like, okay, well, Bunni, these players were drafted really high, but what have they done to prove that? They came to the MLB, they lost their prospect status, and who are they now? And the A's took a gamble in that they could have been nothing. The trade for Blade was AJ Puck. So I think some people might consider that as being a Moneyball pick, not because Blade is a high performance pick, but because a lot of people wanted to keep AJ Puck, even though he couldn't stay on the field, right? And so I think it's managing what a player's outcomes will be, projecting that, understanding where other players' underperformances exist and how you can elevate them, and then bringing them here to make a full team to supplement the core that you have. So, chicken and the egg, but I think that's important because I think for a large part of the game today, I think Moneyball is deployed by everybody. You had the platoons in the city. They had Farhan, who was the A's former GM. I know he's gone now, but a lot of teams employ either a platoon system, or they get a small guy who they'll sell out for contact ability, 200 average, but has 40 home run potential. So that's my reason why Hunter Renfroe is still around in the league, right? Now, no real value, no real defensive value, but the ability to bring in players that over excel in a certain niche or bring a value, and that value is expensive. When you don't have that budget, you can undercut that value to supplement your team with power where you need it and get it for the cheap. You know what I mean? So I see that the Rays do that. The Rays do that as well. The Tampa Bay Rays do that. And I'm going to tell you, I think they developed a system that doesn't get talked about. This bullpenning and the decrease.
They're the ones that started with the opener, and
that was and this the Kansas City really started that bullpenning with that 2014 World Series visit to the Giants, where they didn't let their pitchers go over 4 or 5 innings because they had such a dominant bullpen. I think a lot of teams saw that and they were like, this is a really good way to save on starters. They'll last longer. You don't have to pay them as much because they're not working as many innings. And then I think that got replicated so much that, it really took things out of hand. And now here we are in this pitching crisis. But I think that's where it really started, was those Royals in 2014 getting the World Series off of a so-so starting rotation, but an elite bullpen. To me, that's kind of like the moneyballing it, if you so speak.
I agree with you 100%. As far as signing players based on analytics and sabermetrics to find a value in a particular type of player, 100% agree. I think that's done across sports in general in every single franchise. For the A's to be labeled as that, I believe has hurt their brand, not helped it. And again, you mentioned it earlier. It's looked as a bunch of scrappers that are overachieving and getting the job done. And when you really look at it, the attention is being taken away from the players and being drawn to the front office as a genius type of move. That's where I have the issue with it. I mean, in that darn film, Moneyball, they make Billy Beane look like a darn superhero.
Only small market teams are going to get credit for Moneyball because the whole idea here is that you're shopping in a consignment. You're shopping under swap meet tactics. So Kansas City, Cincinnati, Oakland. It's hard to tell what Miami is anymore. You're right. There's small. Milwaukee even. To your point, Milwaukee actually doesn't get labeled as a Moneyball type team, even though they're considered a small market team. It's just it's seen as good business, right? But the Rays are a highly established team, and they get marketed the same, right? They ship players out all the time. But I do think that there's a little bit of an animosity when discussing the A's in the situation, and it comes with a derogatory kind of accent when you talk about the A's, they're a Moneyball team, as if they don't take the team seriously. And honestly, I don't think John Fisher did.
This episode is brought to you in part by Hims. Guys, ever feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom? It's time you stop worrying about your performance and get Hims, so you can feel confident knowing you can get hard and stay hard whenever you're in the mood. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/locked on. That is HIMS.com/locked on for your personalized treatment options. hims.com/locked on. The products mentioned are chewable, compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription.
The legacy of the A's will always be kind of what if? What if they spent a little bit more? What if they just signed and retained their players, right? Um, I always think of Olsen and Chapman in the most recent years. They seem kind of embittered by Oakland. They say the right things, but I'm always surprised that they don't say more fond things. And I think players around the league that grew up in the system were like, I think they feel that the A's, Fisher specifically, robbed them of an opportunity to win a ring, right? These better players are doing this as a livelihood, but their goal is to win and win a ring. So if you have a group of us together and we're good enough to push the envelope and you don't support us by bringing in the right players or re-signing us, I want to make my name here. I want to make my legacy here. I want to win a ring here. If you don't allow me to do that, then like, what is that? And I think that's how they'll always be remembered. The players that they let go, that we have to watch the playoffs, support other teams, the miraculous plays made by other teams to kick us out of the playoffs, namely the slide by Jeremy Giambi, right? I think it'll always be what if they got one more? What if that early 2000s team got one? What if that We Believe team 2012 to 2014 snuck one? What if they got past the Royals wild card? I think it's always going to be filled with what ifs. It was a little bit more. It's always like a little too little, a little too late in the more modern post-Haas years.
We appreciate you making today's episode of Locked On A's your first listen of the day. For your second listen, be sure to check out the Locked On MLB podcast with your pal Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Click here to listen now. Don't forget that between these episodes, you can keep up with me and your A's by following on social media, on Twitter or X at Locked On A's. We'll see you tomorrow right here on the Locked On A's podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.